They said she was worth less than cattle. That night, under the auctioneer's hammer, Clara Vance learned exactly what price a human life could fetch, and it wasn't enough to cover her stepfather's gambling debts. But when the most dangerous man in the Northern Territories walked through those doors and doubled the bid without blinking, she realized something far worse than being sold. She'd been claimed by a warlord whose reputation was built on ashes and vengeance. What happens when a woman with nothing left to lose meets a man who's forgotten how to feel anything at all? Stay until the end to find out. Hit that like button and drop a comment with your city. Let's see where everyone's watching from. The rain came down like bullets that night. Clara Vance stood on the raised platform in the center of Ashford's livestock auction house, her wrists bound with coarse rope that had already rubbed her skin raw. Water dripped from the tin roof through a dozen holes, creating a rhythmic percussion that almost drowned out the murmur of the crowd below. Almost, but not quite. She could still hear them, the whispers, the appraisals, the casual cruelty of men deciding her value. Bit scrawny for field work, someone muttered. Pretty enough face, though. Could fetch a decent price if Renwick ain't lying about her age. 23 and never married? Something's wrong with her, mark my words. Clara kept her chin up, her green eyes fixed on the back wall where rain streaked down dirty windows. She'd learned years ago that showing fear only made predators hungrier. Her stepfather, Marcus Renwick, had taught her that lesson well, usually with the back of his hand. Tonight, he stood in the shadows near the auctioneer's podium, arms crossed, watching his stepdaughter like she was a horse he was hoping to get top dollar for, which, Clara supposed bitterly, was exactly what she was to him now. The auctioneer, a greasy man named Hollis with tobacco-stained teeth, climbed onto a smaller platform beside her. He reeked of cheap whiskey and desperation, probably getting a cut of whatever price she fetched. Gentlemen, Hollis's voice cracked through the warehouse, and I use that term loosely in present company. A few rough laughs echoed back. We come now to our final lot of the evening. Now, I know what you're thinking. Hollis, why is there a woman on the livestock platform? Well, friends, let me tell you a story about debt, family obligation, and the ancient right of settlement. Clara's jaw clenched. Ancient right, as if calling it something old made it legal, made it right. Ashford existed in the gray space beyond the reach of federal law, a frontier city that had grown too fast, too wild, and too far from civilization for anyone to bother governing it properly. Out here, the strong made the rules. The weak followed them. And those in between? They got sold on nights like this. Clara Vance, Hollis continued, gesturing toward her like she was prize livestock. 23 years of age, literate, can read and write, do figures, healthy, no known diseases, raised in a merchant household so she knows her way around fine goods, inventory management, that sort of thing. He was making her sound like an investment, a commodity. Her stepfather, Marcus Renwick, a respected member of our community. Clara couldn't stop the bitter laugh that escaped her throat. Respected. The man had gambled away her mother's entire estate, drunk himself into debt with half the criminal enterprises in Ashford, and when the collectors came knocking, he'd signed papers transferring his family obligations to cover what he owed. Hollis shot her a warning glare before continuing. Mr. Renwick has, in accordance with frontier settlement law, offered his stepdaughter's indenture to satisfy debts totaling $3,000. The winning bidder will hold rights to her labor and residence for a period of 7 years, after which time she'll be free to go her own way. 7 years. Clara would be 30, if she survived that long. Now, we'll start the bidding at $500. Do I hear 500? A paddle went up near the front. Clara couldn't see the man's face, but she heard his voice, rough, frontier-worn. 500. We have 500. Do I hear 6? Another paddle. 600. 7, called someone from the left side. Clara's breathing stayed controlled, measured. She'd prepared herself for this. When her stepfather had told her 3 days ago what he'd done, she'd raged, she'd wept, she'd tried to run. But Marcus had locked her in the cellar until the auction, and somewhere in those dark hours she'd made a decision. She would survive this. Whatever came next, whoever bought her, she would survive it. She would endure the 7 years. And then she would disappear so far into the frontier that Marcus Renwick would never find her shadow. We're at 1,000, Hollis's voice was getting excited. $1,000, folks. Do I hear 1,100? The bidding had slowed. Clara risked a glance at the crowd. Maybe 50 men, a few women scattered among them. Merchants looking for household labor, ranchers needing hands. A few whose intentions were written clearly in the way their eyes crawled over her. She looked away, swallowing the nausea. 1,000 going once, 1,500. The voice came from the middle of the crowd, flat and emotionless. Hollis's eyebrows shot up. 1,500. Now we're talking. Do I hear 16? A long pause. Clara tried to locate the new bidder, but couldn't spot him in the sea of faces. 1,500 going once? Going twice? 2,000. A different voice this time, from the right. Clara's stomach dropped when she recognized it. Silas Creighton, owner of the Broken Wheel Saloon and half a dozen boarding houses that were anything but respectable. No, not him. Anyone but him. 2,000! Hollis was practically dancing now. Gentlemen, this is unprecedented. Do I hear 2,100? 2,500. The flat voice again. Creighton's head whipped around, trying to see his competitor. Who the hell? 3,000. Creighton's voice had an edge now. That was the full amount of Marcus's debt. He was willing to break even just to win. The warehouse had gone completely silent except for the rain. Every eye was searching for the mysterious bidder who'd driven the price so high. 3,000, Hollis repeated, his voice slightly awed. Do I hear 6,000? The crowd erupted. Clara's head snapped up, her heart suddenly pounding. 6,000. Double the debt. Who would? The crowd parted like water, and Clara saw him for the first time. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with shoulders that seemed to fill the space he moved through. Dark hair, slightly too long, framed a face that looked like it had been carved from stone and weather. He wore black from head to toe, a long coat that swept to his knees, dark pants, boots that looked like they'd walked through hell and back. But it was his eyes that stopped Clara's breath. Gray, cold, absolutely merciless. This was no merchant, no rancher. The crowd scrambled out of his way with a fear that went bone deep, and Clara realized with dawning horror that she knew who this was. Everyone in the Northern Territories knew. Duke Rowan Blackthorne, the warlord of the Blackthorne Territories, a man who'd carved his empire out of the lawless frontier with violence and an iron will. They said he'd killed his first man at 15. They said he'd wiped out the Garrett gang in a single night, leaving nothing but corpses and burning buildings. They said he felt nothing, no mercy, no compassion, nothing human at all. And he'd just bought her for twice what she was worth. Hollis had gone pale. Lord Blackthorne, that is, 6,000 is accepted. Sold to, I'll pay 8. Creighton's voice shook slightly, but greed and pride drove him to his feet. 8,000, and that's my final. Rowan Blackthorne turned his head slowly toward Creighton. He didn't speak, didn't move, just looked at him. Creighton sat down so fast his chair nearly tipped over. 6,000, Rowan said, his voice like gravel and ice. Final price? Where do I pay? Hollis stammered through the rest of the proceedings. Marcus Renwick materialized at Rowan's elbow, practically rubbing his hands together. The debt would be cleared with 3,000 to spare. Blood money for selling his dead wife's daughter. Clara stood frozen on the platform as documents were signed, as money changed hands. She should run. She should scream. She should do something. But where would she go? And what would be the point? In Ashford, a man like Rowan Blackthorne could do whatever he wanted. The law didn't touch him. Nothing touched him. When the paperwork was done, Rowan walked to the platform. Up close, he was even more intimidating. Not because of his size, though that was considerable, but because of the absolute control in every movement. Nothing wasted, nothing soft. He pulled a knife from his belt, and Clara's breath caught. But he just reached up and cut the ropes binding her wrists. They fell away, and Clara stumbled slightly, her arms aching as circulation returned. Can you walk? His voice was surprisingly quiet. Not gentle. There was nothing gentle about this man, but not cruel either. Just factual. Yes, Clara managed, though her legs felt like water. Then come. He turned and walked toward the warehouse doors, not dragging her, not touching her, just expecting her to follow. Clara looked back once. Marcus wouldn't meet her eyes. Hollis was counting money. The crowd was already dispersing, gossip spreading like wildfire. She had nothing. No belongings except the simple dress she wore. No friends. No family worth the name. Just the choice between following the warlord into the storm or standing alone in a warehouse full of predators. Clara took a breath, lifted her chin, and walked after him. The rain hit her like a wall when she stepped outside. Rowan was already at a massive black horse, swinging himself into the saddle with practiced ease. A second horse, smaller but still imposing, stood beside his. He gestured to it. "You can ride?" Yes. Her mother had taught her, back when there was still money for such things. Clara approached the horse, grateful when it stood still as she mounted. She'd half expected Rowan to make her ride with him, to assert dominance. The fact that he'd brought a second horse seemed strange, almost respectful, which made no sense. Men didn't pay $6,000 out of respect. Rowan wheeled his horse around without waiting to see if she could keep up. Clara gripped the reins and followed, her dress already soaked through, her hair plastered to her face. They rode through Ashford's muddy streets, past the saloons and boarding houses, past the respectable district where Clara had once lived before her mother died. The city gave way to open country, to the wild frontier where anything could happen and often did. Clara had no idea where they were going. North, obviously, toward the Blackthorn territories. But beyond that, her future was a blank wall of uncertainty. After an hour of riding, Rowan slowed and finally stopped at an abandoned way station. The roof was mostly intact, offering shelter from the rain. He dismounted and led his horse inside. Clara followed, her whole body shaking now, from cold, from shock, from the adrenaline crash of the last few hours. Rowan unsaddled his horse with efficient movements, then turned to hers. "I'll handle it. You need to warm up before you catch fever." Clara wanted to argue, to assert some kind of independence, but her fingers were too numb to unbuckle anything anyway. She stepped back and watched as he cared for both horses with a competence that spoke of years in the saddle. When he was done, he pulled a rolled blanket from his saddlebag and tossed it to her. "There's a corner over there without holes in the roof. Get out of the wet clothes before hypothermia sets in." Clara caught the blanket reflexively. What? "You're soaked. You're shaking. Change into something dry, or you'll be useless tomorrow." He said it like he was discussing equipment maintenance, not a woman's modesty. "I don't have anything dry," Clara pointed out, her voice sharper than she'd intended. Fear was giving way to anger, a safer emotion. Rowan paused, then pulled out a spare shirt from his bag. "Use this. It'll be big, but it's dry." He turned his back, giving her privacy. Clara stood there, clutching the blanket and shirt, trying to make sense of this. The most feared man in the territories had just bought her for an absurd price, and now he was politely turning his back while offering her his clothes? "I don't understand," she said into the darkness. "What do you want from me?" Rowan's shoulders tensed slightly. "Right now? I want you to not die of exposure. Everything else can wait until morning." "That's not an answer. It's the only answer you're getting tonight." His voice held a note of finality that said the conversation was over. Clara's hands trembled as she moved to the corner he'd indicated. She stripped off her wet dress with fumbling fingers, painfully aware of how vulnerable she was. But Rowan didn't turn around, didn't speak, just stood by the horses, his back a solid wall. She pulled on his shirt. He was right. It was enormous on her, hanging to her knees, and wrapped herself in the blanket. It smelled like leather and wood smoke and something else she couldn't identify. Something that made her think of winter nights and distant mountains. "I'm done," she said quietly. Rowan turned around. His eyes swept over her once, assessing, then moved away. "Get some sleep. We ride at dawn." "Where are we going?" "My estate, 3 days north." "And then what?" "And then we'll discuss the terms of your situation." Situation. What a bloodless word for slavery. Clara wrapped the blanket tighter. "You paid $6,000 for me. You could have gotten farm labor for 1/10 of that. You could have—" "Yes. So why?" Rowan was silent for so long Clara thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, quieter, harder. "Because 7 years ago, I watched a woman stand on that same platform. I was young, powerless. I had nothing to offer against the man who bought her. He paused. She killed herself 3 months later. Clara's breath caught. I swore I'd never watch it happen again. Rowan's eyes met hers, and for the first time she saw something beneath the ice. Something that looked like old rage, banked but never extinguished. So when I heard Marcus Renwick was selling his stepdaughter to cover his debts, I made arrangements. You came there to buy me? Specifically? Yes. But you don't even know me. No, Rowan agreed. I don't. But I knew her, and I won't fail again. Clara stared at him, her mind reeling. This wasn't desire, wasn't lust or power or any of the things she'd feared. This was something far more complicated. This was guilt, vengeance, atonement for a sin she had nothing to do with. I'm not her, Clara said finally. I'm not whoever you couldn't save. I know. Rowan turned away again, settling against the wall. Go to sleep, Clara. Tomorrow's a long ride. Clara lay down on the cold ground, the blanket wrapped around her, questions spinning through her exhausted mind. She'd been sold tonight, bought by a warlord, taken into the wilderness. But she was alive, she was warm, and the man who owned her papers had turned his back to give her privacy. Nothing made sense. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing away the last traces of the life she'd known. When Clara finally fell asleep, she dreamed of gray eyes and old ghosts, and a platform where women were sold like cattle beneath the unforgiving sky. Dawn came cold and colorless. Clara woke to the sound of Rowan saddling the horses, his movements quiet but purposeful. Her whole body ached from sleeping on the ground, and the reality of her situation came crashing back with brutal clarity. She was owned, bound by legal documents to a man she didn't know, being taken to an isolated estate 3 days into the frontier. There's bread and dried meat in the saddlebag, Rowan said without looking at her. Eat. We won't stop until noon. Clara forced herself to sit up, still wrapped in the blanket. Her dress from last night hung over a beam, still damp but better than it had been. She dressed quickly, ignoring the way the fabric clung uncomfortably to her skin. When she emerged from the corner, Rowan handed her a canteen and a cloth bundle. Inside was exactly what he'd promised, hard bread and jerky that looked like it could survive an apocalypse. Thank you, Clara said, the words automatic. Rowan's eyes flicked to her. Don't thank me. You'll earn everything I give you. How? The question came out sharp. What exactly do you expect from me? We'll discuss that when we reach the estate. He swung onto his horse. Mount up. Clara wanted to refuse, wanted to demand answers now, not later. But what choice did she have? She was 3 hours from Ashford, in country she didn't know, with no money and no resources. She mounted the horse and followed. They rode in silence for hours. The landscape shifted from the scrubland around Ashford to rolling hills covered in tough grass and scattered stands of pine. It was beautiful in a harsh, unforgiving way, like everything else in this part of the world. Around midday, Rowan finally stopped near a creek. The horses drank while Clara sat on a rock eating more of the endless jerky and watching her captor with wary eyes. He hadn't spoken since dawn, hadn't touched her, hadn't done anything threatening. But the silence itself felt like pressure, like waiting for a storm to break. Can I ask you something? Clara said finally. Rowan's hand stilled on his horse's mane. You can ask. The woman you mentioned, the one you couldn't save. Who was she? No one you'd know. That's not an answer. It's all the answer you need. Rowan's voice held a warning note. Clara pushed anyway. You bought me to atone for failing her. I think I have a right to know who I'm standing in for. Rowan turned to face her fully, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. You're not standing in for anyone. You're Clara Vance. Your stepfather sold you. I bought you. That's where your story begins. My story began 23 years ago, Clara shot back. I'm not some blank slate you can write redemption on. Something that might have been respect flickered across Rowan's face. No, you're not. He moved toward her, and Clara tensed, but he just held out the canteen. Her name was Sarah Brennan. She was 19. She was bought by a rancher named Pollard, who worked her to death, and worse. When I finally had the resources to do something about it, she was already gone. How old were you? 18. The word was bitter. Old enough to have money, not old enough to have power, not yet. And now you have both. Yes. Rowan's eyes held hers, and I use them as I see fit, including buying women off auction platforms before men like Silas Creighton can get their hands on them. Clara understood then. This wasn't about her. This was about a system Rowan hated, a past he couldn't change, and the limited power he had to make any difference at all. It should have made her feel better. It didn't. So what am I? She asked quietly. Your good deed. Your charity case? You're a woman who deserves better than being sold like property. Rowan's voice was hard. What you become beyond that is up to you. I'm contracted to you for 7 years. How exactly is anything up to me? Rowan was silent for a moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a folded document. He held it out to her. Clara took it with shaking hands. It was the contract. Her contract. She unfolded it, expecting to see the standard terms of indenture. 7 years labor. Residence at the owner's discretion. Obedience and service. But the document she held was different. Terms of employment, the header read. Not indenture. Employment. She scanned the clauses, her heart pounding. Room and board provided. Wage of $50 per month held in trust. Freedom to leave the estate grounds with notice. No physical or intimate demands permitted. Contract voidable at any time at employee's request. Clara looked up, her mind reeling. This isn't what was filed in Ashford. No, what was filed in Ashford is standard indenture paperwork. Legal and binding. Rowan's expression was unreadable. This is the contract you'll sign with me, the one that actually matters. But if I sign this and the other one is still legally binding, what's to stop you from just ignoring this, from enforcing the legal contract instead? Nothing, Rowan admitted, except my word. The word of a warlord who's killed how many men? 73 last I counted. He said it without pride or shame, just fact. But I've never broken an agreement. Ask anyone in the territories. My word is iron. Clara stared at the document in her hands. This was insane. A trick. It had to be. Why? She demanded. Why go through this whole charade? If you just wanted to help me, you could have given me money to run. Could have. Money doesn't mean anything without protection, Rowan interrupted. Creighton would have found you. Your stepfather would have sold you again. Out here, a woman alone doesn't survive long. You know that. He was right. Clara hated that he was right. So you're doing this out of what? Guilt? Call it what you want. Rowan moved back to his horse. Read the contract. Think about it. When we reach the estate tomorrow, you can decide whether to sign. And if I don't? Rowan paused with his hand on the saddle. Then I'll give you enough money to reach the eastern settlements where federal law actually exists. I'll provide escort, and you'll be free to go. Clara's throat tightened. Just like that? Just like that. He mounted smoothly. But think carefully. The East isn't paradise, and out here, I can actually protect you. They rode on. Clara spent the rest of the day trying to make sense of Rowan Blackthorne. Every story she'd heard painted him as a monster, ruthless, violent, without conscience. But the man riding ahead of her had offered her freedom of choice, had given her privacy, had even asked her if she could ride instead of just throwing her on a horse. It didn't add up. That night they stopped at another way station, this one in better condition, with actual bunks and a fireplace. Rowan built a fire without being asked, then disappeared outside to check the perimeter. Clara sat by the flames, turning the contract over in her hands. $50 a month was more than most skilled laborers made. Over 7 years, that would be over $4,000. Enough to buy property, to start a business, to build a real life. If this was real, if Rowan actually honored it. You're thinking too loud. Clara jumped. She hadn't heard Rowan come back in. He settled against the wall, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight. Ask whatever you're going to ask. What do you get out of this? Clara blurted. You're paying me a fortune to... To what? Work in your household? That makes no sense. Doesn't it? Rowan's voice was dry. I have a large estate. It needs managing. My previous housekeeper died last year. I need someone literate, organized, and capable of handling both servants and supplies. You could hire someone for 1/10 of what you're offering me. Yes, but they wouldn't have your motivation. Clara frowned. What motivation? To prove everyone in that auction house wrong. Rowan's eyes met hers. You stood on that platform with your chin up and defiance in your eyes. You didn't break, didn't beg. Even when Creighton was bidding, you didn't panic. You couldn't have seen that from the back of the room. I wasn't in the back of the room. I was watching the whole time. He said it matter-of-factly. I've been watching Marcus Renwick for 2 weeks, waiting to see if he'd actually go through with it. Why didn't you just pay off his debts? Let me go free. Because he would have just gotten into more debt. Sold you again. Rowan's voice went flat. Men like him don't change. The only way to stop him was to remove his leverage. Clara was silent, absorbing this. You bought me to save me from my stepfather. I bought you to save you from the system, Rowan corrected. Marcus was just the mechanism. The real problem is that women can be sold at all in territories like this. And you think you can change that? No. The honesty was brutal. I think I can save one woman at a time, starting with you. Clara looked into the fire, her mind spinning. What if I'm terrible at managing an estate? What if I fail? Then you fail. You still get paid. The contract still holds. That's a terrible business decision. I'm not running a business. I'm keeping a promise. Rowan stood, moving toward one of the bunks. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we reach Blackthorn, and you'll see what you're actually agreeing to. Clara lay awake long after Rowan's breathing evened into sleep. The contract was still clutched in her hand, the paper warm from the fire. She'd spent the last 3 days preparing to endure, to survive whatever came next. She hadn't prepared for this, for choice, for the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she could do more than survive. She could actually live. As the fire burned low and shadows danced across the walls, Clara made her decision. Tomorrow, she would sign. And then she would prove to everyone, to her stepfather, to Ashford, to the world, that Clara Vance was worth far more than the price on an auction platform. She was worth everything. The Blackthorn estate appeared on the horizon like a fortress carved from the mountain itself. Clara had expected something brutal, a compound surrounded by walls, maybe guards with rifles. What she saw instead took her breath away for entirely different reasons. The main house was built from dark stone and timber, 3 stories high with sharp angles that seemed to defy the wind howling across the ridge. Behind it, the Rocky Mountains rose like jagged teeth against the sky. The architecture was severe, uncompromising, but there was a harsh beauty to it, like everything else in Rowan's world. Home, Rowan said simply, the first word he'd spoken in hours. As they rode closer, Clara noticed details that made her chest tighten. The grounds were immaculate, no weeds, no disorder. Outbuildings stood in precise arrangement. Fences were maintained, gates hung straight. This wasn't just property, this was control made visible. A stable hand appeared as they approached. A young man who took their horses with a respectful nod but careful distance from Rowan. Clara noticed how the boy's eyes flicked to her, then away quickly. Curious but cautious. Come, Rowan said, dismounting. I'll show you the house. Clara followed him up stone steps to a heavy oak door. He pushed it open, and she stepped into a world that contradicted everything she'd expected. The interior was warm, not physically, though a fire burned in a massive hearth, but in design. Dark wood paneling, thick rugs, furniture that looked built for comfort rather than show. Books lined shelves in the main room, maps covered one wall. It looked like a place where someone actually lived, not just ruled. Mrs. Chen, Rowan called. A woman appeared from a side hallway, 50s maybe, with sharp eyes and graying hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore practical clothes and carried herself with the confidence of someone who ran the household and knew it. Lord Blackthorn. Her eyes went to Clara, assessment swift and complete. This is her? This is Clara Vance. She'll be taking over as head of household once she's settled. Rowan pulled off his coat. Show her to the East Wing. Get her proper clothes. She'll need everything. Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose slightly. The East Wing? That's private quarters, not servant housing. Rowan's tone allowed no argument. She'll eat in the main dining room. She has free access to the library and grounds. The older woman's expression shifted to something unreadable. I see. And the staff? How should they address her? By her name. She's not a servant. Rowan turned to Clara. Mrs. Chen has been managing things since our last housekeeper died. She'll show you how everything runs. Learn from her. Before Clara could respond, he strode off down another hallway, leaving her standing in the entrance with Mrs. Chen's evaluating stare. Well, the older woman said after a moment, you're certainly not what I expected. What did you expect? Clara asked, lifting her chin despite her exhaustion. Someone broken. Someone grateful to be rescued. Mrs. Chen's lips quirked. You look ready to bite. I'm not broken, and I'm not sure yet if I've been rescued or just moved to a prettier cage. Mrs. Chen's smile grew. Oh, I like you. Come on then, let's get you settled before you collapse. You look like you've been dragged through hell backward. The East Wing turned out to be a suite of rooms, bedroom, sitting area, private bathroom, with actual running water. The furniture was simple but well made. Windows looked out over the mountains. It was nicer than anywhere Clara had lived since her mother died. He gave you his sister's rooms, Mrs. Chen said quietly, setting fresh linens on the bed. Clara froze. He has a sister? Had. She died 6 years ago. Fever. Mrs. Chen's expression was careful. These rooms have been empty since. He doesn't let anyone in here. Until now. The weight of that settled on Clara's shoulders. Why would he? That's a question for him, not me. Mrs. Chen moved to the wardrobe. I'll have clothes brought up. The seamstress will come tomorrow to fit you properly. For now, I've got some things that might work. She pulled out dresses. Simple, practical, well-made. The kind of clothes a woman of means might wear, not a servant. Mrs. Chen, Clara said carefully, what exactly am I supposed to be here? The older woman paused, then turned to face her directly. That depends entirely on you, girl. Lord Blackthorne bought you off that platform. Yes, word travels fast, and brought you here. He's given you private quarters and authority over household management. What you make of that is your choice. Everyone must be talking. Everyone's always talking in a place like this. Ignore them. Mrs. Chen moved toward the door. Dinner's at 7. You can eat in your room tonight if you prefer, but starting tomorrow, you'll need to show your face. The staff needs to see you're not hiding. After she left, Clara sank onto the bed, her mind reeling. She pulled out the contract again, reading it for the 100th time. Everything Rowan had promised seemed to be coming true. Private quarters, respect, choices. But why? The question gnawed at her. She bathed in water that was actually hot, dressed in a borrowed gown that almost fit, and tried to make sense of her reflection in the mirror. She looked different already, less hunted, but her eyes still held wariness. At 7 o'clock, despite Mrs. Chen's offer, Clara went downstairs. She found the dining room by following voices, low, male, discussing something about fence lines and winter supplies. When she appeared in the doorway, conversation stopped. Rowan sat at the head of a long table. 2 other men occupied chairs to his right. All 3 turned to look at her. Clara, Rowan's voice held approval. Come in, meet my captains. Captains, not servants. The men who actually ran the Blackthorne operations. The first stood, mid-30s, dark-skinned, with a scar running down his left cheek. James Coltrane. I managed security and borders. The second remained seated, older and grayer. Tobias Marsh. I handle logistics, supplies, trade routes. His eyes swept over Clara with obvious skepticism. Clara Vance, she said, keeping her voice steady. I'm managing the household. The household. Tobias's tone made it clear what he thought of that arrangement. Interesting choice, bringing in a girl from an auction platform to run domestic operations. Tobias, Rowan's voice went cold. Your opinion wasn't requested. Maybe it should be. The older man leaned back. You paid $6,000 for her. That's a quarter of our liquid operating capital. For what? To salve your conscience over Sarah Brennan? The room went deadly quiet. Clara felt like she'd been punched, so the whole estate knew about Sarah. Knew Rowan had bought Clara as some kind of replacement for old guilt. Is that what this is? Clara heard herself say. Am I just your very expensive guilt offering? Rowan's jaw clenched. That's not... Because if I'm going to manage this household, I need to know exactly what role I'm playing. She turned to Tobias. You think I'm a waste of resources? Say it to my face. Tobias blinked, clearly not expecting her to engage. I think Lord Blackthorn's personal demons are clouding his business judgment. And you think I'm what? Some helpless victim who needs saving? Aren't you? Tobias challenged. I'm a woman who was sold by her stepfather to cover his gambling debts, Clara said flatly. I survived that. I'll survive this, whether you approve or not. James Coltrane made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. Sit down, Clara, Rowan said quietly. Tobias, we'll discuss the capital allocation later, privately. Clara sat, her heart hammering. She'd just challenged Rowan's captain in front of him. That was either incredibly brave or monumentally stupid. Dinner arrived. Venison, roasted vegetables, bread that was actually fresh. Clara ate mechanically, aware of the tension crackling through the room. The southern fence line needs reinforcement before winter, James said, clearly trying to move past the awkwardness. I've got crews ready to start tomorrow. Do it, Rowan replied. And double the patrol rotation. I don't trust Carrington to stay quiet after what happened in Ashford. Clara's ears pricked up. Carrington. She knew that name. The Carrington family owns half the territory east of here, Tobias explained, noticing her interest. Lady Evelyn Carrington in particular. She's been persistent in her attentions toward Lord Blackthorn. Persistent, James snorted. She proposed marriage 3 times last year. And I refused 3 times, Rowan said coldly. The topic is closed. But Clara saw something in Tobias's expression. Concern, maybe worry. You think she'll cause trouble? Because of me? Because of everything, Tobias said. Evelyn Carrington doesn't take rejection well. And now you've shown up, given private quarters, eating at the Lord's table. He shook his head. She'll see you as competition. I'm not competition. I'm an employee. With a very unusual contract, James pointed out. That makes you interesting. Interesting draws attention. Attention draws trouble. After dinner, Rowan asked Clara to stay behind. The captains left, Tobias still wearing his disapproval like armor. You handled that well, Rowan said once they were alone. I made an enemy of your logistics, Captain. Tobias is cautious by nature. He'll come around. Rowan poured 2 glasses of whiskey, offering her one. Clara took it, though she rarely drank. Will he? Or will he spend the next 7 years resenting my existence? That's up to you. Rowan settled into a chair by the fire. You want to know what you are here? I'll tell you. You're a test. Clara's hand tightened on the glass. Test of what? Of whether I can build something different. Rowan stared into the flames. The frontier runs on violence and exploitation. The strong crush the weak. Women are property. Power is everything. He paused. I'm tired of that system. So you're trying to... what? Reform it from within? I'm trying to prove it doesn't have to be that way. Not in my territory. His gray eyes met hers. You're educated. Capable. You survived abuse and betrayal and still had fire in your eyes on that platform. If anyone can help me build something better here, it's you. Clara sat down across from him. That's a lot of pressure to put on someone you bought 3 days ago. I know. Rowan's voice was quiet. That's why the contract gives you an out. You can leave any time. I won't stop you. But you hope I'll stay. I hope you'll try. Even if you fail, even if it all falls apart. At least we tried. Clara sipped the whiskey, letting the burn steady her nerves. What happens when Lady Evelyn Carrington shows up here demanding to know who I am? You tell her the truth. You're the head of my household. She has no authority over you. And when she doesn't accept that, Rowan's smile was sharp and cold. Then she learns what happens when people challenge my decisions on my land. Clara should have been reassured. Instead, she felt the weight of becoming a symbol in someone else's war. Rowan wasn't just trying to save her, he was using her to make a point, to challenge a system, to prove something to himself and everyone else. That night, alone in her borrowed rooms, Clara signed the contract. Not because she trusted Rowan completely, not because she believed this would work, but because for the first time in years, someone was giving her a chance to be more than a victim, to build something, to matter. She would take that chance, even knowing it might destroy her. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of learning. Mrs. Chen proved to be an exacting but fair teacher, showing Clara every aspect of running the estate: supply inventories, staff schedules, budget management, seasonal preparations. "You catch on quick," Mrs. Chen admitted one afternoon as Clara balanced the household ledgers without error. "Most girls from merchant families can't do figures this well." "My mother insisted I learn properly," Clara said. She said money was power, and women needed to understand power. "Smart woman. What happened to her?" "Pneumonia, 3 years ago." Clara's voice went flat. "Marcus married her for her money. When she died, he went through the estate like a plague." Mrs. Chen's expression softened. "And now you're here, building something new." "Trying to." Clara closed the ledger. "Though half the staff still looks at me like I'm a curiosity." "Give them time. You're earning their respect whether they admit it yet or not." But respect from the household staff was one thing. The real test came 2 weeks after Clara's arrival, when a carriage rolled up to the estate bearing the Carrington family crest. Clara was in the main hall reviewing supply orders when Rowan emerged from his study, his expression grim. "She's here," he said flatly. "Evelyn Carrington?" "With her father, and probably half the territorial council." Rowan straightened his coat. "This is going to be unpleasant. Should I make myself scarce?" "No." His eyes met hers. "You're head of household. You have every right to be present. In fact, I want you there." Clara's stomach clenched. "As what? Your shield?" "As proof that things are changing." Rowan's voice was steel. "Stay close. Say little. Let them show their true nature." The Carringtons swept in like a storm system. Lady Evelyn in an elaborate gown that must have cost more than Clara's entire childhood home, her father in formal attire that looked absurd in the frontier setting, and 3 men Clara didn't recognize but who carried themselves with the arrogance of power. Evelyn was beautiful in a cold, sharp way, dark hair, calculating eyes, a smile that never reached past her lips. She took in the hall, the furnishings, and then her gaze landed on Clara. "And who is this?" Her voice could have cut glass. "Clara Vance," Rowan said before Clara could respond. "Head of my household." Evelyn's eyebrows rose. "How unexpected. I wasn't aware you'd hired new staff, Rowan." "I don't require your awareness to make decisions on my own estate." Rowan's tone was glacial. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this visit?" Lord Carrington stepped forward, a bull of a man with too much confidence. "We've come to discuss the Territorial Council's concerns about your recent activities." "Activities?" "Your disruption of the Ashford auction," one of the other men said. He was younger, sleek, and dangerous. "Driving up prices, interfering with legitimate commerce." "I participated in a legal auction," Rowan interrupted. "Nothing I did violated any territorial law." "You paid an absurd amount for a single indenture," Evelyn said, her eyes still on Clara. $6,000. One has to wonder why. Clara felt the weight of every gaze in the room. "My financial decisions are my own concern," Rowan said coldly. "Not when they disrupt the market." Lord Carrington's voice boomed. "You've created instability. Other auctioneers are now inflating prices, expecting similar windfalls. It's causing chaos." "Good," Rowan said flatly. "Perhaps it will make people think twice about selling human beings like livestock." The room went silent. "You can't be serious," Evelyn breathed. "Rowan, indenture is legal. It's how the frontier operates. It's exploitation masquerading as law." Rowan cut her off. "And I'm done pretending otherwise." Lord Carrington's face reddened. "You're one man, Blackthorne. You can't change centuries of precedent because of some misguided moral crusade." "Watch me." Clara's heart hammered. She'd known Rowan opposed the system, but hearing him declare war on it in front of the Territorial Council was something else entirely. This is about Sarah Brennan, isn't it? Evelyn's voice was poisonously sweet. You're still carrying guilt over a girl who died 7 years ago, and now you're trying to atone by… She gestured at Clara. Rescuing this one? Careful, Evelyn. Rowan's voice went dangerously quiet. Or what? You'll add me to your collection of broken women you're trying to fix? Evelyn laughed, the sound brittle. You can't save them all, Rowan. You couldn't save Sarah. You won't save her. She pointed at Clara. All you'll do is drag everyone around you into your personal war. Clara felt something crack open inside her. I don't need saving. Every eye turned to her. I needed a choice, Clara continued, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. He gave me one. That's more than anyone else in this world ever offered. A choice? Evelyn's smile was cruel. You're living in his house, wearing clothes he provided, eating food from his table. You're as owned as any servant, contract or not. At least I'm paid for my labor, Clara shot back. How many women in your household can say the same? Evelyn's face went white with rage. I think this conversation is over, Rowan said, stepping between them. You've delivered the council's concerns. I've noted them. Now leave my property. This isn't finished, Blackthorn, Lord Carrington growled. You're making powerful enemies. I've had powerful enemies since I was 15 years old. I'm still here. They're not. Rowan's smile was arctic. Show yourselves out. The Carringtons left in a fury of rustling silk and muttered threats. The moment the door closed, Clara's legs nearly gave out. Rowan caught her elbow. Breathe. I just insulted Lady Evelyn Carrington to her face, Clara gasped. Yes, it was magnificent. Rowan guided her to a chair. Though you've likely made yourself a target. I was already a target the moment I arrived here. Clara looked up at him. What you said to them, about changing the system. You meant it. Every word. They'll destroy you for it. They'll try. Rowan's expression was grim. That's why I need people like you, people who understand what's broken and are willing to fight to fix it. Clara's hand shook. I'm not a fighter. I'm just trying to survive. Survival is fighting. You've been doing it your whole life. Rowan crouched down to her eye level. The question is, are you ready to fight for something bigger than just yourself? Clara thought of the auction platform, of Marcus's betrayal, of every woman she'd seen broken by a system that treated them as commodities. What exactly are you asking me to do? Help me build something different here, not just manage the household, actually change how things work. Fair wages for all staff, education opportunities, protection for vulnerable people. His eyes burned with intensity. Make this estate proof that another way is possible. And when the Territorial Council comes after us with more than just words, then we prove we're stronger than they are. Clara stood, her decision crystallizing. I'll do it, but on one condition. Rowan raised an eyebrow. Which is? You stop treating me like a symbol. I'm not your redemption for Sarah Brennan. I'm not your proof of concept. I'm Clara Vance, and if we're doing this, we do it as partners, not savior and saved. For the first time since she'd met him, Rowan smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. Deal. They shook hands, and Clara felt the shift between them. This was no longer about guilt or rescue. This was about two people choosing to stand together against a world that wanted to crush them both. Outside, storm clouds gathered over the mountains, and somewhere in the distance, Clara knew enemies were already plotting their destruction. But for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid. She was ready to fight. If you or someone you know is having a difficult time, free support is available. Find resources. The first attack came 3 weeks later, in the dead hours before dawn. Clara woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of shouting. She bolted from bed, her heart slamming against her ribs as orange light flickered through her window. The eastern storage barn was burning. She threw on clothes and ran barefoot down the stairs. The main hall was chaos, servants rushing with buckets, James Coltrane barking orders, and Rowan already outside in the freezing November air, directing the response. The grain stores, Mrs. Chen grabbed Clara's arm. We need to save what we can or we'll starve before spring. Clara didn't hesitate. She joined the bucket line, passing water from the well to the men trying to contain the blaze. The heat was ferocious, singeing her eyebrows even from 20 feet away. Her hands blistered on the rough rope handles, but she didn't stop. It took 2 hours to bring the fire under control. By then, the barn was a smoking ruin, and half their winter grain was ash. Rowan stood in the wreckage as dawn broke, his face carved from stone. James approached, carrying something, a broken bottle with a rag stuffed in the neck. "Arson," James said flatly. "Found 3 more of these that didn't light. Someone wanted us to burn." "Carrington," Tobias spat, appearing from the smoke-stained darkness. "Has to be. This is retaliation for—" "We don't know that," Rowan interrupted, but his eyes said otherwise. Clara stepped forward, her nightgown ruined, her hands raw. "Whether it's Carrington or not doesn't matter right now. We need to inventory what survived and calculate if we have enough to last until spring." All 3 men turned to look at her. "She's right," Mrs. Chen said, emerging from the crowd of exhausted staff. "Standing here speculating doesn't fill empty bellies. We need numbers." Rowan nodded slowly. "Clara, take Mrs. Chen and do a full inventory. Tobias, send riders to every neighboring settlement. See who has surplus they're willing to sell. James, double the guard rotation and establish a perimeter watch. No one gets within a mile of this estate without us knowing." They scattered to their tasks. Clara worked through the morning with Mrs. Chen, counting sacks of grain that had been pulled from the fire, assessing damage to preserved foods, calculating yields from the root cellar. The numbers were grim. "We're short by at least 40%, Clara told Rowan when they met in his study that afternoon. "Even if we ration strictly, we won't make it to spring harvest without buying more supplies." "Which will cost money we don't have," Tobias added bitterly. "Not after someone decided to spend 6,000 on—" "Finish that sentence and you're dismissed," Rowan said quietly. Tobias's mouth snapped shut, but the resentment in his eyes burned hotter than the barn fire. Clara refused to flinch. "How much can we afford to spend on grain?" "Maybe 2,000 if we liquidate some assets," Rowan said, "but that leaves us vulnerable if anything else goes wrong." "Something else will go wrong," James said from his position by the window. "This was a warning shot. Whoever did this, Carrington or not, they're just getting started." Clara's mind raced through possibilities. "What if we don't buy grain?" All eyes turned to her. "What if we negotiate for it?" she continued. "The neighboring settlements must have their own vulnerabilities, things they need that we can provide. Security patrols, skilled labor, medical supplies." "Barter economy," Mrs. Chen said thoughtfully. "It could work. If anyone's willing to deal with us." "Why wouldn't they be?" Clara asked. The silence that followed was answer enough. "Because aligning with Blackthorn right now is dangerous," Tobias finally said. "Word's already spread about the confrontation with Carrington. Every settlement within 100 miles knows there's a power struggle brewing. Most will stay neutral. Some will actively side against us." "Then we find the ones who won't." Clara straightened her spine. "I'll go. I'll negotiate directly." "Absolutely not," Rowan said immediately. "Why not? I'm head of household. This falls under my responsibilities." "You're a target," James pointed out. "Evelyn Carrington specifically called you out. Sending you beyond our borders is suicide." "Then send guards with me," Clara turned to Rowan. "You wanted me to help build something different. This is how we start. Not by hiding behind walls, but by showing people there's another way. That we can cooperate instead of just dominate." Rowan's jaw worked. "You have no idea how brutal the frontier settlements can be. I was sold on an auction platform 3 weeks ago. I think I understand brutal." Clara held his gaze. "Let me do this. Let me prove I'm more than just your expensive statement." The room was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. "I'll go with her," Mrs. Chen said suddenly. "I know most of the settlement leaders. They'll be more willing to talk with a familiar face." Rowan looked between them, clearly torn. Finally, he nodded. "James goes too, and you take 6 of our best riders. At the first sign of trouble, you retreat immediately. Understood?" "Understood," Clara agreed. "And Clara?" Rowan's voice stopped her at the door. "Don't trust anyone. Not completely. Out there, everyone's looking for an angle." She left the next morning on horseback, Mrs. Chen and James flanking her, 6 armed men forming a protective perimeter. The first settlement was half a day's ride, a collection of rough buildings called Hickory Ridge that specialized in lumber and game. The settlement leader was a woman named Margaret Thorne, weathered and sharp-eyed, who received them in what passed for a town hall. "Heard about your barn?" Margaret said without preamble. "Heard it wasn't an accident." "We're not here to discuss that," Clara replied, keeping her voice steady. "We're here to propose a trade agreement." Margaret leaned back in her chair. "Let me guess. Blackthorn needs grain, and he's too proud to beg for it himself, so he sent his new pet to do the asking." The word stung, but Clara didn't react. "Lord Blackthorn is offering protection services. Regular patrols through your territory, escort for trade caravans, security consultation for your perimeter defenses. In exchange, we'd like to negotiate for grain surplus." "Protection from what?" Margaret's laugh was harsh. "The only threat in these parts is Blackthorn himself. Why would I pay him to protect me from his own temper?" "Because there are worse things than Blackthorn in the frontier," Mrs. Chen interjected smoothly. "The Garrett remnants are still active in the Western Territories. Raiders have been hitting settlements all winter, and unless I'm mistaken, you lost 2 wagons to bandits last month." Margaret's expression flickered. "You're well informed." "We make it our business to be." Clara leaned forward. "Look, I understand the politics. You're afraid of picking the wrong side in whatever conflict is brewing, but this isn't about sides. This is about survival. We need food. You need security. That's simple economics." "Nothing simple when Evelyn Carrington is involved," Margaret said bluntly. "She sent riders through here last week, made it very clear that anyone who trades with Blackthorn will be cut off from Carrington markets. That's half our lumber sales gone." So that was the play. Economic warfare. Clara felt anger kindle in her chest. "And you're going to let her dictate your business because you're afraid?" "I'm practical," Margaret corrected. "Carrington has resources Blackthorn doesn't. She has allies. She has cruelty and entitlement," Clara interrupted. "We have something better. We have integrity." Margaret studied her for a long moment. "You really believe that, don't you? That integrity matters out here?" "It has to matter somewhere," Clara said quietly. "Or what's the point of any of this?" The settlement leader stood, pacing to the window. "I can give you grain, but not as a trade agreement, as a loan. You pay it back after your spring harvest, with 20% interest." It was extortion disguised as generosity, but Clara knew they had no choice. "Agreed. We'll need—" "I'm not finished." Margaret turned back. "And you owe me a favor, unspecified, to be called in when I choose." James stirred. "That's too vague. We can't agree to—" "Those are my terms," Margaret said flatly. "Take them or ride to the next settlement and see if anyone else is even willing to talk to you." Clara met Mrs. Chen's eyes. The older woman gave the tiniest nod. "Agreed," Clara said. They left Hickory Ridge with a promise of grain delivery within the week and a debt hanging over their heads like a noose. The next 2 settlements were worse. One refused to even receive them, the other laughed them off the property. By the time they reached the 4th settlement, Twin Rivers, Clara was exhausted and discouraged. But Twin Rivers was different. The settlement leader was a young man named David Chen, Mrs. Chen's nephew, as it turned out. He welcomed them warmly and listened to their proposal with genuine interest. "I can help," David said. "We've got surplus grain this year, and frankly, Carrington's monopoly on trade routes has been choking us. I'd be happy to work with someone who might challenge her control." "David," Mrs. Chen said carefully, "you understand what you're risking." "I understand that nothing changes if we all keep bowing to the same tyrants." David's eyes met Clara's. "You're trying to build something different at Blackthorn. I respect that. Count me in." They negotiated fair terms, grain in exchange for security patrols, and a percentage of Blackthorn's spring harvest. No extortion, no threats, just honest trade. As they prepared to leave, David pulled Clara aside. "Be careful. Word is Evelyn Carrington is planning something big. She's been meeting with the Territorial Council, consolidating support. Whatever's coming, it's going to be soon." "What kind of something?" Clara asked. "I don't know, but my advice, watch your back, and don't trust anyone who claims neutrality. In a war like this, neutrality is just cowardice with better PR." They rode back toward Blackthorn as evening fell. the horses laden with the first grain delivery from Twin Rivers. Clara should have felt triumphant. They'd secured enough food to survive the winter, built new alliances, proved that cooperation was possible. Instead, she felt dread coiling in her stomach. James felt it too. "Something's wrong," he muttered, scanning the darkening tree line. "We're an hour from home," Mrs. Chen said. "We'll be fine." The arrow took one of their guards out of the saddle before anyone could react. Then the world exploded into chaos. Armed riders poured out of the forest, at least 20 of them, masked and moving with military precision. This wasn't a random bandit attack. This was an ambush. "Ride!" James roared, drawing his pistol and firing at the closest attacker. Clara kicked her horse into a gallop, Mrs. Chen beside her, the surviving guards forming a protective barrier as arrows and bullets flew. One guard went down, then another. They were being herded, Clara realized with horror, driven away from Blackthorn deeper into unfamiliar territory. "The ravine!" James shouted. "If we can reach the ravine, we can—" He never finished the sentence. His horse stumbled, throwing him hard. Clara saw him hit the ground and try to rise, but the attackers were closing in. "We have to go back for him," Clara screamed. "We can't." Mrs. Chen grabbed her reins. "Clara, he's buying us time. Don't waste it." But Clara couldn't leave him, couldn't abandon someone who'd protected her. She wheeled her horse around, ignoring Mrs. Chen's shouts, and rode straight back into the fight. She had no weapons, no training, just desperate courage and a fury that burned hotter than fear. She reached James and threw herself from the saddle, grabbing his arm. "Get up! Get out of here, you idiot girl!" An attacker loomed over them, blade raised. Clara grabbed a fallen branch and swung it with everything she had. It connected with the man's knee, and he went down with a howl. James used the distraction to regain his feet, grabbing his pistol. "Behind me!" They fought back to back, impossibly outnumbered, death closing in from all sides. Clara's mind went blank with survival instinct. Every lesson from growing up in a hostile household suddenly useful. How to read body language, how to anticipate violence, how to stay alive when the world wanted you dead. Then she heard it. The sound of more horses, more riders. They were finished, but the new arrivals weren't more attackers. They wore Blackthorn colors, led by Rowan himself on his massive black stallion, his face a mask of controlled fury. The fight was over in minutes. The ambushers scattered, half of them dead or captured, the rest fleeing into the forest. Rowan dismounted and went straight to Clara, his hands gripping her shoulders. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough. "I'm fine, James." "I'm alive," James groaned, being helped up by another guard. "Thanks to this crazy woman." Rowan's eyes swept over her, the mud, the blood that wasn't hers, the wild determination still blazing in her face. "You rode back into the fight." "I couldn't leave him." "Oh, you could have been killed." "So could he." Clara's voice cracked. "I'm not going to watch people die for me and do nothing." Rowan pulled her against his chest, and Clara felt him shaking, not with fear, with rage barely contained. "Get the prisoners to the estate," he ordered over her head. "I want to know who sent them." But when they interrogated the captured ambushers back at Blackthorn, the answer was worse than expected. The men wouldn't talk. They had nothing on them. No markings, no papers, nothing to indicate who'd hired them. Until one of them, younger than the others, broke under James's questioning. "Carrington," he gasped. "Lady Evelyn Carrington. She paid us $5,000 to kill everyone in your party and make it look like bandits." The room went silent. "She specifically wanted the woman dead," the prisoner continued. "Said it would send a message about what happens to people who—" Rowan's fist connected with the wall, leaving a crater in the plaster. "Get him out of my sight." After the prisoner was removed, Rowan turned to his assembled council, James, Tobias, Mrs. Chen, and Clara. "This is war," he said flatly. "Evelyn just declared it openly. We can't prove it was her," Tobias argued. "One prisoner's testimony won't stand up in any territorial court." "Then we don't use the courts," Rowan's voice was ice. "We handle this ourselves." "You mean kill her," Clara said quietly. Rowan didn't deny it. "She tried to murder you, tried to murder my people. You expect me to do nothing? I expect you to be smarter than her." Clara stepped forward. "If you kill Evelyn Carrington, you prove every terrible thing she said about you. You become the monster, and you give the Territorial Council justification to come after you with everything they have. So what do you suggest? The fury in his eyes was terrible to witness. Clara took a breath, her mind racing through possibilities. Then it hit her, the one move Evelyn wouldn't expect. We bring me into society. Everyone stared at her. Evelyn wants me to hide, wants me to be your dirty secret, proof that you're just exploiting vulnerable women. Clara's voice grew stronger. So we do the opposite. You introduce me publicly, bring me to the next territorial assembly, make it clear exactly what I am and what I represent. That's suicide, James said flatly. The entire council will tear you apart. Let them try. Clara met Rowan's eyes. You said you wanted to prove another way was possible. This is how. Not by matching Evelyn's violence, but by exposing her lies. By showing everyone that I'm not broken, not owned, not ashamed. They'll destroy you, Mrs. Chen said softly. You have no idea how cruel that world can be. I survived an auction platform. I survived an ambush tonight. Clara lifted her chin. I can survive their judgment. Rowan studied her for a long moment. The Winter Assembly is in 3 weeks, in Ashford. Then we have 3 weeks to prepare. If we do this, Rowan said slowly, there's no going back. You'll be exposed to every predator in the territories. Every enemy I've made will come after you. They're already coming after me. Clara gestured to her mud-stained clothes, evidence of how close she'd come to death. At least this way, I'm fighting back on my terms. Tobias shook his head. This is insane. We should fortify, not expose ourselves. No. Rowan's voice cut through the argument. She's right. We've been reacting. It's time to control the narrative. He looked at Clara. 3 weeks. Can you be ready? I'll have to be. The next weeks were a blur of preparation. Mrs. Chen brought in a seamstress from Twin Rivers who created a gown that was both elegant and defiant, deep emerald that brought out Clara's eyes, cut in a style that said wealth without ostentation. Not a servant's dress, not a victim's dress. A warrior's armor disguised as silk. Rowan drilled her on territorial politics, teaching her the names and alliances of every major player. James taught her self-defense basics, not enough to make her dangerous, but enough that she wouldn't be completely helpless. Mrs. Chen coached her on etiquette, on how to hold her head high even when drowning in contempt. Remember, the older woman said the night before they left for Ashford, they'll try to break you with words, with looks, with casual cruelty disguised as concern. Don't let them see it land. I won't, Clara promised. But when they arrived in Ashford 3 days later, Clara felt her confidence waver. The Territorial Assembly was held in the grandest building in the city, a former governor's mansion that had been converted into a council hall. Carriages lined the drive, men and women in expensive clothes mingled on the steps. This was the world that had sold her. And now she was walking back into it by choice. Rowan offered his arm. Last chance to change your mind. Not a chance. Clara placed her hand on his sleeve, feeling the tension in his muscles. They walked in together, and conversation died like a candle in wind. Every eye turned to them. Clara felt the weight of their stares, calculating, hostile, curious. She kept her spine straight, her expression calm, even as her heart tried to beat out of her chest. Lord Carrington stood near the center of the hall, Evelyn at his side in a gown that probably cost more than Clara's entire existence. When Evelyn saw them, her face went through a fascinating series of emotions: shock, rage, calculation. "Lord Blackthorne," someone called out. "What a surprise to see you at Assembly. You usually avoid these gatherings." "I thought it was time to participate more actively in territorial governance," Rowan replied smoothly. "Allow me to introduce Miss Clara Vance, head of my household staff and my partner in several new initiatives." The whispers started immediately. Clara heard fragments. Auction platform, 6,000, shameless. "How democratic of you," Evelyn said, gliding forward. Her smile was poisonous. "Bringing your purchased help to a council assembly. What's next? Inviting the stable hands to vote?" "Miss Vance isn't help," Rowan said coldly. "She's an equal partner in the management of Blackthorne Estate. She's here because she has valuable perspective on economic reform and labor practices." "Perspective?" Lord Carrington's laugh was ugly. She was sold to cover gambling debts. What perspective could she possibly— The perspective of someone who survived a broken system, Clara interrupted, her voice ringing clear across the hall. The perspective of someone who's seen firsthand how frontier law exploits the vulnerable. The perspective you're all terrified to acknowledge because it might require you to change. The silence was absolute. Evelyn's eyes glittered with malice. How eloquent! Tell me, Miss Vance, are these your words or just lines Lord Blackthorne taught you to recite? My words, Clara said firmly. Though I'm sure you find it hard to believe a woman could think for herself. You're so used to being a decorative puppet for your father's ambitions. Gasps echoed through the room. No one spoke to Lady Evelyn Carrington that way. Evelyn's face went white, then red. You dare! I dare everything, Clara cut her off. I have nothing left to lose. You tried to kill me 3 weeks ago, had me ambushed on the road, had my companions murdered. She turned to address the entire room. So yes, I dare to stand here and tell you all exactly what I think of your corrupt, hypocritical system. That's slander, Lord Carrington roared. You have no proof. We have a witness, Rowan said quietly. A prisoner who confessed to being hired by Lady Evelyn to murder Clara and make it look like a bandit attack. The room erupted in chaos. Evelyn's face was a mask of barely controlled rage. One prisoner? She said icily. The word of a common criminal against mine. You must be desperate, Rowan. I'm thorough. Rowan produced a document. I also have banking records showing a $5,000 withdrawal from Carrington accounts the day before the attack, followed by deposits into known mercenary contacts. Clara's breath caught. She hadn't known he had that. Evelyn's composure finally cracked. You broke into my family's financial records? That's illegal even in frontier territory. No more illegal than attempted murder. Rowan's voice was steel. The question is, what does the council plan to do about it? The territorial council members exchanged glances, uncomfortable, calculating. Clara realized with sinking certainty that they wouldn't do anything. Evelyn had too much power, too many connections. I think, said a council elder carefully, that these are serious accusations that require proper investigation. Until such time, nothing changes, Clara said bitterly. You all know she did it. You know exactly what kind of person she is. But you're too afraid of losing your comfortable positions to actually stand for something. Mind your tongue, girl, Lord Carrington snarled. You may have Blackthorne fooled, but we all know what you are. Purchased property pretending to be a person. And there it was, the core of everything wrong with this world. Clara stepped away from Rowan's side, standing alone in the center of the hostile crowd. You're right, I was purchased. Sold by my stepfather for $3,000 to cover his debts. Stood on a platform while men bid on me like livestock. The room was silent again, but this time the quality of silence was different, uncomfortable, ashamed even, though most would never admit it. But I'm still here, Clara continued, her voice ringing. Still standing, still thinking, still fighting, because being sold didn't erase my humanity. Your laws might say I'm property, but your laws are wrong. She turned in a slow circle, meeting eyes that couldn't hold her gaze. How many of you have daughters, sisters? Would you stand here and call them property if they'd been unfortunate enough to end up on that platform instead of me? No one answered. The frontier runs on exploitation, Clara said, on the strong crushing the weak, on women being chattel and power being the only thing that matters. But Lord Blackthorne is proving there's another way, fair wages, equal partnerships, protection for the vulnerable. Her voice hardened. And those of you trying to destroy him for it, you're terrified, because if he succeeds, your entire corrupt system collapses. Enough! Evelyn's voice cracked like a whip. You think one pretty speech changes anything? You think these people will suddenly grow consciences? She laughed, harsh and brittle. Look around, you fool. No one here cares about your sob story. They care about power and profit. Blackthorne has neither anymore. She gestured dramatically. His resources are depleted. His reputation is ruined. His allies are abandoning him. Her smile was vicious. And you, his broken trophy, standing here playing reformer, you're the final proof that he's lost his mind. Clara felt the words land like blows, but she didn't flinch. If standing against you means being broken, then I'll stay broken forever. Evelyn moved closer, her voice dropping to something intimate and cruel. You won't last the winter. Blackthorn will tire of his social experiment, and you'll end up exactly where you started, desperate and alone. Only this time, no one will buy you, because everyone will know you're used goods. Evelyn. Rowan's voice was lethal quiet. Step away from her. Or what? Evelyn's eyes glittered. You'll kill me in front of the entire council? Go ahead, prove everything I've said about you. The tension stretched wire tight. Clara could feel Rowan's rage, barely leashed. One wrong word and this would explode into violence. She made her choice. Clara turned to face the crowd, ignoring Evelyn completely. I came here tonight to prove I'm not afraid of you. Mission accomplished. She looked at Rowan. Can we go now? The air in here is suffocating. Rowan's expression shifted, surprised, then something that might have been pride. Yes, we're done here. They turned toward the door and Clara felt a surge of triumph. They'd walked into the lion's den and walked out intact. They'd exposed Evelyn's attempt on her life. Wait. The voice came from an unexpected source. One of the younger council members, a man Clara didn't recognize. Miss Vance is right, the man said, stepping forward. About all of it. The system is corrupt, and we're all complicit. He looked at his fellow council members. I move that we establish a committee to investigate labor practices in the territories, including the legality of indenture sales. Shocked silence. Seconded, said another voice. Margaret Thorne, the settlement leader from Hickory Ridge. She'd been standing in the back, unnoticed. And I move we investigate the attack on Blackthorn's people with an independent inquiry. The room exploded into argument. Some council members shouted support. Others roared opposition. Lord Carrington's face went purple with rage. In the chaos, Rowan took Clara's arm and guided her toward the exit. They made it to their carriage before anyone could stop them. As they pulled away from the mansion, Clara finally allowed herself to shake. What just happened? You started a revolution, Rowan said quietly, or at least the beginning of one. They'll never actually change anything. You know that. Maybe not, but you planted seeds. He looked at her with something like awe. You stood in front of everyone who's ever hurt you and refused to break. That matters. Clara leaned back against the seat, exhaustion crashing over her. Evelyn will retaliate. Harder this time. Yes, Rowan's voice went cold, which is why I'm not taking any more chances. What does that mean? He didn't answer, and Clara felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. They arrived back at Blackthorn near midnight. Clara went straight to her rooms, desperate for sleep, but as she entered, she froze. Someone was in her sitting room. She grabbed the letter opener from her desk, her heart pounding. Who's there? A figure stepped from the shadows, and Clara's world tilted. It was Marcus Renwick, her stepfather. Hello, Clara, he said, his smile oily and familiar. We need to talk about the future, your future, and how much it's worth to me. In his hand, he held legal documents, and Clara's blood ran cold as she recognized what they were. The original indenture contract, the one filed in Ashford, the one that said she still belonged to him for 7 years, and he'd come to collect. Clara's fingers tightened on the letter opener, her mind racing through 1,000 possibilities, and none of them good. Marcus stood there in her private quarters, the rooms that were supposed to be safe, holding documents that could destroy everything she'd built. How did you get in here? Her voice was steadier than she felt. I have friends everywhere, Clara, even in Blackthorn's household. Marcus moved closer, and she caught the familiar smell of whiskey and desperation. Did you really think you could just disappear? That I'd let my investment walk away? I'm not your investment. Rowan bought the contract. Rowan bought a contract, Marcus interrupted, waving the papers. This one, the legal one filed with territorial records. This one says you're indentured to whoever holds these documents. And guess what? I never actually transferred ownership. That auction? That sale? Technically invalid. Clara's blood went cold. You're lying. Am I? Marcus's smile was vicious. Check the filing dates. Check the signatures. Blackthorn has a pretty piece of paper that says he owns you. I have the legal document that actually matters. He settled into her reading chair like he owned it. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to convince your warlord boyfriend to pay me another $10,000 for the legitimate transfer, or I take you back to Ashford and sell you to someone who will actually use you properly. Rowan will kill you. Maybe. But then he'll be a murderer, and the Territorial Council will have justification to seize his assets and hang him. Marcus examined his fingernails. Or he can pay me what I'm owed, and everyone walks away happy. Clara's mind spun. This was extortion, pure and simple. But if Marcus was telling the truth about the documents, if there was a technicality in the filing, then legally he might actually have a case. Frontier law was tangled enough that a clever argument could overturn almost anything. 10,000, she said slowly. That's more than triple what he paid originally. Call it inflation, call it interest, call it whatever you want. Marcus stood, moving toward the door. You have until tomorrow night to get me the money. After that, I take the documents to the territorial magistrate, and we see who really owns Clara Vance. He paused at the threshold. Oh, and Clara, don't try to run. I've got men watching every exit from this estate. You leave without my permission, and I'll know. Then he was gone, leaving Clara alone with her racing heart and the sick certainty that he wasn't bluffing. She found Rowan in his study, going over supply inventories with Tobias. Both men looked up when she burst in without knocking. We have a problem, Clara said, then explained everything in short, clipped sentences. Rowan's expression went from concern to fury to something colder and more dangerous than either. He's in my house? He's probably back in Ashford by now. Clara's hands shook. Is he right? About the contracts? Tobias was already pulling out the papers from Rowan's safe, comparing them to the territorial filing records they kept. His face grew grimmer with each passing second. It's possible, he admitted finally. The transfer of ownership requires specific language and filing procedures. If Marcus deliberately sabotaged the process, left out key phrases, filed with the wrong office, used incorrect dates, then technically the original contract might still be primary. Can we fight it? Rowan demanded. In court? Maybe. But it would take months, cost a fortune in legal fees, and depend entirely on which magistrate hears the case. Tobias looked at Clara. If he takes this to someone sympathetic to his position, or someone Carrington has bought, you could lose. Clara sat down before her legs gave out. So he wins. Again. He sells me, drinks away the money, and I end up… She couldn't finish the sentence. No. Rowan's voice was absolute. That's not happening. Then what, you pay him? Reward him for extortion? I pay him nothing. Rowan pulled out a different set of documents from his desk drawer. But I might offer him something he wants even more than money. Clara looked at the papers he was holding, property deeds by the look of them. What are those? Claims to 3 silver mines in the Western Territories, high-yield operations worth at least $50,000 if properly worked. Rowan's smile was sharp and cold. They're also completely played out. Haven't produced anything but rock and empty promises for 2 years. Understanding dawned. You're going to swindle him. I'm going to give him a choice. $10,000 in cash that he'll drink away in 6 months, or mining claims worth a fortune if he has the patience and capital to develop them properly. Rowan's eyes glinted. Which do you think a gambling addict will choose? The mines, Tobias said slowly. He'll see the potential value and convince himself he's getting the better deal. Exactly. And by the time he realizes they're worthless, the contracts will be properly filed, legally binding, and completely uncontestable. Rowan looked at Clara. But it requires you to play along, to sit across from him and sell this lie. Can you do that? Clara thought of Marcus's face, his casual cruelty, the way he'd sold her like livestock without a moment's hesitation. Could she lie to him, manipulate him, use his own greed against him? Yes, she said. I can do that. They arranged the meeting for the next evening in neutral territory, a coaching inn halfway between Blackthorn and Ashford. Clara dressed carefully in one of her new gowns, armor disguised as silk, and rode out with Rowan and 6 armed guards. Marcus was already there, sitting in a private room with 2 rough-looking men who were obviously hired muscle. He smiled when Clara entered, that oil-slick expression she'd seen 1,000 times growing up. Clara, Rowan. Punctual as always. He gestured to chairs. Shall we discuss terms? Let's. Rowan placed a leather case on the table. I have your 10,000, plus interest, as requested. Marcus's eyes lit up with greed. He reached for the case, but Rowan pulled it back. However, Rowan continued smoothly, I'm prepared to offer you something substantially more valuable if you're willing to negotiate. More valuable than 10,000 cash? Marcus was already hooked. Clara could see it in the way he leaned forward. Rowan pulled out the mining deeds. Claims to 3 silver operations in the Western Territories. Current estimated value, $50,000. With proper investment and management, potentially worth twice that. Marcus's hands literally trembled as he reached for the papers. Clara watched him scan the technical language, saw the moment greed overcame sense. Why would you give me these instead of cash? Marcus asked, suspicion finally surfacing. Because I don't have 50,000 in liquid assets right now, Rowan lied smoothly. The mines are inherited property I've never bothered to develop. They're worth more to someone willing to invest the time. He paused. Or you can take the 10,000 and we're done. Your choice. Clara played her part perfectly. Take the cash, Marcus, please. Let's just end this. The reverse psychology worked beautifully. Marcus's eyes narrowed. Why don't you want me to take the mines, Clara? What do you know about them? Nothing, Clara said, injecting just the right amount of nervousness into her voice. I just want this over with. She's been reviewing all my property holdings, Rowan added casually. As head of household, she has access to all the records, including mining reports. That sealed it. Marcus was now absolutely convinced the mines were valuable and that Clara was trying to protect Rowan's interests by steering him away from them. I'll take the mines, Marcus declared, plus 2,000 cash for operational expenses. Rowan pretended to consider, then nodded. Agreed. But the contract transfer happens tonight, immediately, and you sign paperwork swearing you have no further claim to Clara Vance or her labor. Marcus barely read the documents before signing. Clara watched him scrawl his name, watched him take the mining deeds like a child with a new toy, watched him walk out of that inn thinking he'd won the greatest victory of his life. When he was gone, Clara finally breathed. He really bought it. Greed makes people stupid, Rowan said, and Marcus has always been greedy. Tobias examined the signed contracts with satisfaction. These are airtight. He can't touch you now. Legally, you're free. Free. The word felt strange in Clara's mouth. She'd been fighting for survival so long that actual freedom seemed impossible. What happens when he realizes the mines are worthless? She asked. By then he'll have spent the 2,000 on equipment and claims registration, Rowan said. He might try to sue, but he signed off on everything. He took the deal voluntarily. No court will side with him. Clara should have felt triumphant. Instead, she felt hollow. He'll hate me for this. When he figures it out. He already hated you, Rowan pointed out gently. At least now he has no power over you. They rode back to Blackthorn in silence. Clara tried to process what had just happened, how close she'd come to losing everything, how narrowly they'd avoided disaster. But all she could think about was the look on Marcus's face, the greed and stupidity that had finally worked in her favor instead of against her. When they reached the estate, Mrs. Chen was waiting with news. You have visitors. A delegation from Twin Rivers and Hickory Ridge. They've been waiting for hours. Clara exchanged glances with Rowan. What do they want? They wouldn't say, just that it's urgent. In the main hall, they found not just David Chen and Margaret Thorne, but leaders from 6 other settlements Clara had never even met. They stood when Rowan entered, but their eyes went to Clara. Miss Vance, Margaret said formally, we've come to discuss an alliance. Clara blinked. An alliance? Word of what happened at the Territorial Assembly has spread, David explained. What you said about the system being broken, about fair labor practices and protecting the vulnerable, people are talking. People want change. The frontier is always run on exploitation, another settlement leader added, a man Clara didn't recognize. But we're tired of it. Tired of watching our children sold to cover debts. Tired of Carrington and her ilk controlling every trade route and market. He looked at Rowan. You're the only one with the resources and reputation to actually challenge the power structure. We want in. Rowan was clearly as surprised as Clara. What exactly are you proposing? Margaret stepped forward. A coalition. Multiple settlements working together under shared principles, fair wages, protection for workers, regulated contracts instead of unlimited indenture. We pool resources for defense and trade. We present a united front against territorial council corruption. You're describing a revolution, Tobias said flatly from his position by the door. We're describing survival, Margaret corrected. Individually, Carrington can crush any of us. Together, we're harder to break. Clara's mind raced. This was bigger than she'd ever imagined, bigger than one estate trying to do things differently. This was potentially restructuring the entire territorial economy. It's dangerous, she said. Evelyn won't accept this lying down. The Territorial Council will fight you with everything they have. They're already fighting us, David said. At least this way we fight back. What do you need from us? Rowan asked. Leadership, coordination, a central point of authority that the council can't simply ignore. Margaret's eyes went to Clara again. And her. We need her visible, speaking, showing people that change is possible. Clara's breath caught. Me? I'm nobody. You're the woman who stood on an auction platform and survived, Margaret interrupted. You're the woman who walked into a territorial assembly and called out the most powerful people in the frontier to their faces. You're proof that the system doesn't have to break us. She paused. People will follow that. They'll believe that. She's right, said another voice. Mrs. Chen stepped forward from where she'd been listening. I've been getting letters, dozens of them, from women in settlements across the territories. They're asking about you, about how you did it, about whether there's hope. Clara looked at Rowan, overwhelmed. This isn't what we planned. Plans change. His voice was quiet. The question is, are you ready for this? Was she ready? Ready to become the face of a movement she'd never asked to lead? Ready to paint an even bigger target on her back than the one already there? But then Clara thought of Sarah Brennan, the woman she'd never met but who'd died 7 years ago because no one fought for her. She thought of every woman who'd stood on that auction platform before and after her. She thought of the system that had tried to crush her and failed. Yes, she said. I'm ready. Over the next month, everything changed. The coalition grew. Settlements sent representatives, workers organized. Clara found herself in a role she'd never expected. Not just managing Blackthorn's household, but coordinating an entire network of communities trying to build something new. She wrote letters, organized meetings, traveled to settlements with Rowan and armed escorts, speaking to crowds of people who looked at her like she was hope incarnate. It was terrifying and exhilarating and exhausting all at once. The Territorial Council noticed. Of course they noticed. Evelyn Carrington's response was swift and vicious. She used her control of trade routes to strangle settlements that joined the coalition. She spread rumors about Clara, that she was Rowan's mistress, that she was manipulating desperate people, that the whole movement was just a power grab disguised as reform. Some of it stuck. Some people believed her, but more people didn't, because Clara had something Evelyn never understood: authenticity. She'd lived the suffering she spoke about. She'd survived the system she was fighting, and people recognized truth when they heard it. The breakthrough came 6 weeks after the Territorial Assembly, when Clara traveled to a settlement called Redstone that had been firmly in Carrington's sphere of influence. The town leader, a hard woman named Sarah Brennan, yes, that's Sarah Brennan's older sister, had invited Clara to speak despite threats from Carrington. Clara stood in Redstone's town square in front of 200 people who'd come to hear her, to judge her, to decide if she was worth the risk. I'm not going to lie to you, Clara began. Joining this coalition is dangerous. Evelyn Carrington will come after you. She'll use economic pressure, threats, maybe even violence. She'll make you pay for defying her. Silence. Clara could feel their fear, their uncertainty. But here's what she can't do, Clara continued, her voice strengthening. She can't erase what you know is true. She can't make indenture suddenly moral. She can't turn exploitation into something noble. And she can't stop you from choosing to build something better. She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the crowd. I was sold 6 months ago, stood on a platform while men bid on me. I had nothing. No power, No resources, no hope. But I had choice. Even when it seemed like I had none, I chose to survive. I chose to fight. I chose to believe that I was worth more than the price on my contract. And you were right, someone shouted from the crowd. Clara smiled. So are you. Every single one of you. You're worth more than whatever Carrington says you are. Your labor deserves fair compensation. Your children deserve protection. Your communities deserve to thrive without some distant council dictating your worth. Easy to say when you have Blackthorn's protection, another voice called. What about the rest of us? That's exactly why we need the coalition, Clara replied. So protection isn't just for people lucky enough to catch a warlord's attention. So it's systematic, guaranteed, built into the structure itself. She gestured to Sarah Brennan. Your leader lost her sister 7 years ago because the system failed her. How many more sisters, daughters, mothers have we lost since? How many more will we lose if nothing changes? Sarah Brennan stepped forward, tears on her weathered face. My sister died believing she was worthless, that she deserved what happened to her. I won't let that be her legacy. She looked at the crowd. Redstone joins the coalition. Anyone who doesn't like it can leave. No one left. That night, Clara stood on the balcony of Redstone's inn, watching the settlement below. Rowan found her there, 2 glasses of whiskey in hand. Sarah Brennan's sister, Clara said quietly as he handed her a glass. You brought me here on purpose. You knew what it would mean. I knew it might make a difference, Rowan admitted. Sarah's been resistant to the coalition, but hearing you speak, seeing what you've become, what I've become, Clara repeated. And what's that? A leader, a symbol, someone who actually gives people hope. Rowan leaned on the railing beside her. It's more than I ever expected. Clara sipped the whiskey, letting the burn steady her nerves. Evelyn's going to escalate, you know that. I know. She'll come after me directly, after us, after everyone who's joined. Yes, Rowan's voice was calm, and we'll be ready. Clara turned to face him. How can you be so certain? Because I've been fighting battles my entire life. I know what it looks like when you're winning. His gray eyes met hers. And Clara, we're winning. She wanted to believe him. But that night, lying in an unfamiliar bed in Redstone's inn, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that the real fight hadn't even started yet. She was right. The summons came a week later, delivered by an official territorial courier. The council was calling an emergency assembly to address disruptions to territorial stability and economic order. Attendance was mandatory for all major landholders and settlement leaders. It's a trap, James said flatly when they reviewed the summons in Rowan's study. Obviously, Rowan agreed, but we can't refuse without giving them justification to declare us in rebellion. So we go and walk into whatever they've planned, Tobias said grimly. Clara read the summons again, noting the details. It's in Carrington Hall, on their territory, under their control, where they can control the narrative, the proceedings, and probably have us arrested the moment we say something they don't like, Mrs. Chen added. Then we don't give them the opportunity. Clara's mind was racing. We bring witnesses, lots of them. We make it public, not a closed council meeting. We force them to show their true nature in front of everyone. Rowan's eyes gleamed. A counter-assembly. Exactly. They summon us to Carrington Hall? Fine. But we bring 300 people from coalition settlements. We bring testimony. We bring evidence of every abuse the current system enables. Clara stood, pacing. They want to paint us as disruptors? We show everyone exactly what we're disrupting and why it deserves to be torn down. That's brilliant, David Chen said from his position by the window. And insane. Carrington could have you all arrested. On what charges? Clara challenged. We're attending a mandatory assembly as ordered. We're bringing constituents to observe territorial governance. Everything we're doing is technically legal. You're learning to think like a frontier politician, Margaret Thorne said with approval, using their own rules against them. The assembly was set for 3 weeks away. They had that long to prepare, to organize, to build their case. Clara threw herself into the work with desperate focus, knowing this might be their only chance to shift the balance of power. She collected testimonies from dozens of workers about exploitation and abuse. She compiled economic data showing how Carrington's monopolies were strangling settlements. She built a case not just for reform, but for revolution. And through it all, Rowan was beside her, not leading, but supporting, offering resources, connections, protection. Their partnership had evolved into something neither had expected. Not romance exactly. The situation was too dangerous, too complicated for that. But respect, trust, the kind of bond forged in fire. "You've changed," Rowan said one night as they reviewed documents in his study. Clara looked up from the papers. "How?" "When I bought you off that platform, you were surviving, fighting to stay alive." He paused. "Now you're fighting to change the world. That's different." "Is it?" "Feels like survival to me, just bigger survival. For more people." "Maybe that's what revolution always is," Rowan said quietly. "Survival that refuses to stay small." The night before the assembly, Clara couldn't sleep. She stood in her rooms, the sisters' rooms that Rowan had given her, and looked at the woman in the mirror. She barely recognized herself. 6 months ago, she'd been a frightened girl on an auction platform. Now she was coordinating a political movement that threatened the entire territorial power structure. How had she gotten here? A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Chen entered, carrying something wrapped in cloth. "I've been saving this," the older woman said. "It belonged to Rowan's sister. I think she'd want you to have it." She unwrapped the cloth to reveal a necklace. Simple silver with a single stone, nothing ostentatious, but beautiful in its restraint. "Thank you," Clara whispered, touching the pendant. "You remind me of her," Mrs. Chen said. "Eliza. She was fierce, too, refused to accept the world as it was, kept pushing for it to be better." Her eyes were sad. "The fever took her before she could see any of it change." "I'll wear it tomorrow," Clara promised. "For her." Mrs. Chen smiled. "Give them hell, girl, for all of us who couldn't fight back." The next morning, Clara dressed in her finest gown, the emerald one that had become her armor, and pinned Eliza's necklace at her throat. She looked in the mirror one last time and saw not a victim, not a survivor, but a warrior. They rode for Carrington Hall with an army at their backs. Not soldiers, but settlers. Workers. Women who'd survived indenture. Men who'd watched the system crush their families. 300 strong, they came to bear witness. Carrington Hall was a monstrosity of colonial architecture, all white columns and excessive grandeur. Lord Carrington and Evelyn stood on the steps as the coalition arrived, their expressions shifting from smugness to shock as they realized the scale of what was coming. "What is the meaning of this?" Lord Carrington demanded as Rowan dismounted. "This is a council assembly, not a public circus." "Territorial law states assemblies must be open to public observation," Clara replied, stepping down from her horse. "We're simply exercising that right." Evelyn's eyes blazed with hatred. "You dare!" "I dare everything," Clara interrupted, echoing her words from months ago. "You should know that by now." They filed into Carrington Hall's assembly room, a massive space designed to hold maybe 50 people comfortably, 300 packed in, standing shoulder to shoulder, filling every available inch. The council members looked panicked. The proceedings began with formalities, then Lord Carrington stood to present the official complaint. "This council has been asked to address systematic disruption of territorial economic order by a coalition led by Duke Rowan Blackthorne and his—" Carrington paused, sneering. "Associate Clara Vance. Their actions have destabilized trade, encouraged worker rebellions, and threatened the very foundations of frontier society. By giving people fair wages?" Clara stood without waiting for permission. "By protecting workers from exploitation? By suggesting that human beings shouldn't be sold like cattle? Those are the destabilizations you're concerned about?" "You have no standing to speak here," a council elder snapped. "I have every right," Clara shot back. "I'm a property holder in the territories. I manage one of the largest estates in the northern regions, and I'm here representing 300 citizens who deserve to be heard." "You're representing chaos," Evelyn said icily, "and you'll be silenced." "Try it," Clara challenged. "In front of all these witnesses. Show everyone exactly what kind of council you are." The room erupted. Council members shouted. Coalition settlers shouted back. It was chaos, but controlled chaos, exactly what Clara had planned. In the disorder, the council's pretense of dignity and authority crumbled. Finally, Rowan stood. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. Enough! Silence fell. You called this assembly to address disruption, Rowan said. Fine, let's address it. Clara, present the evidence. And Clara did. For 3 hours, she presented testimony after testimony, workers describing abuse, families torn apart by indenture contracts, economic data showing how Carrington monopolies strangled independent settlements, evidence of corruption, exploitation, cruelty. The council tried to interrupt, tried to shut her down. But every time they did, the crowd roared disapproval, 300 voices drowning out the protests of power. By the end, even some council members looked shaken. This is all very touching, Evelyn said finally, her voice dripping venom. But it changes nothing. Frontier law supports the current system, and this council upholds frontier law. Then change the law, Clara said simply. That's what councils are for, isn't it? Making laws that serve the people? The law serves order, Lord Carrington bellowed. Your coalition serves chaos. No, said a voice from the crowd. Sarah Brennan stepped forward. Our coalition serves justice, something you've forgotten the meaning of. Who are you to lecture this council? Carrington demanded. I'm someone who lost a sister to your precious order, Sarah said, her voice breaking. Someone who's watched your system crush good people for 7 years. Someone who's done being silent. She looked at the other council members. How many more have to die before you admit this is broken? Another voice joined hers, then another, then dozens, all calling out their stories, their losses, their demands for change. The council was drowning in testimony, in truth they couldn't refute or silence. Finally, one of the younger council members, the same one who'd seconded the motion at the Territorial Assembly, stood. I move that we establish immediate labor reforms, he said, including regulation of indenture contracts, mandatory wage standards, and independent oversight of settlement practices. Seconded, Margaret Thorne called. This is absurd, Evelyn shrieked. You can't just overturn centuries of... All in favor? The young councilman interrupted. Hands went up. Not enough to pass, not yet. But enough to show the council was fracturing. Enough to show that Clara and Rowan's revolution was working. This assembly is adjourned, Lord Carrington declared, seeing he was losing control. Council will reconvene in private session to... No. Clara's voice rang out. You don't get to make decisions in private anymore, not about this, not when it affects all of us. You have no authority. I have the authority of every person in this room who's been crushed by your system and survived, Clara interrupted. And we're not leaving until you actually listen. The standoff stretched. Clara could feel the tension, the possibility of violence hanging in the air. If Carrington called guards, if this turned into a physical confrontation, people would die. But then something unexpected happened. The young councilman walked across the room and stood beside Clara. She's right, he said. All of it. And I'm done pretending otherwise. Another council member joined him. Then another. Not a majority, not yet, but enough to show the tide was turning. Evelyn's face went white with rage. You're all traitors. No, Clara said quietly. We're all just tired of being afraid. The assembly dissolved into chaos after that. Council members arguing, coalition members celebrating, Carrington trying desperately to maintain control. But the damage was done. The council had fractured publicly. The illusion of their absolute authority had cracked. As Clara rode back to Blackthorn that night, exhausted but triumphant, Rowan spoke quietly beside her. You did it. You actually shifted the balance. We did it, Clara corrected. All of us. No, you led. We followed. He paused. I bought you off that platform thinking I was saving you. Turns out you were saving all of us. Clara looked at the settlers riding with them, at the coalition they'd built, at the future they were fighting for. She'd been sold for $3,000 6 months ago. Now she was worth more than any price could measure, and she was just getting started. The retaliation came faster than anyone expected. 3 days after the assembly, Clara was reviewing settlement reports in Blackthorn's library when James burst through the door, his face grim. We've got a problem. Multiple problems. He spread a map across her desk. Carrington's blocking every trade route into coalition settlements. No grain shipments, no medical supplies, nothing. She's trying to starve us out before winter. Clara studied the map, her mind racing. How long can our settlements hold without external supplies? Most have maybe 6 weeks of reserves. After that, James didn't need to finish. She's betting we'll fracture under pressure, Clara said. That settlements will abandon the coalition to save themselves. It's a smart bet. Tobias appeared in the doorway, looking haggard. I've already received letters from 3 settlement leaders asking to withdraw. They're terrified. Clara stood, pacing to the window. Outside, the first snow of winter was falling, beautiful and deadly. We need to break her monopoly on the trade routes. How? She controls every major passage through the mountains, Tobias said. The only alternative routes are through Garrett territory, and those raiders would slaughter any caravan we sent. Then we negotiate with the Garretts. Everyone stared at her. You're joking, James said flatly. The Garrett gang are murderers and thieves. Rowan spent years fighting them. They hate us. They hate Carrington more, Clara pointed out. She's been encroaching on their territory for months, trying to establish legitimate control over routes they consider theirs. Enemy of my enemy, right? That's insane, Tobias said. Even if they agreed to talk, what makes you think they wouldn't just kill our negotiators and take everything? Because we'd offer them something they want more than murder. Clara turned from the window. Legitimacy. Legal trading rights through our settlements. A chance to go from outlaws to merchants. James and Tobias exchanged looks. Rowan will never agree to this. Then I'll convince him, Clara said. Where is he? She found Rowan in the training yard, working through sword forms with an intensity that suggested he was trying to kill his frustration. He stopped when he saw her approach, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the freezing air. We need to talk about the Garretts, Clara said without preamble. Rowan's expression went cold. No. You haven't heard my proposal. I don't need to. The Garretts are raiders and killers. I've buried too many people they've murdered to ever negotiate with them. Even if it's the only way to save the coalition? Clara stepped closer. Rowan, Carrington is choking our supply lines. Settlements are going to start dropping out within weeks. We need alternative routes, and the Garretts control them. So we fight them for control. With what army? We're already stretched thin protecting coalition settlements. We don't have the resources for a war on 2 fronts. Clara grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. I know you hate them. I know what they've done. But sometimes survival requires making deals with devils. Like the deal you made with me? Rowan's voice was sharp. Clara didn't flinch. Exactly like that. You were the feared warlord of the Northern Territories. Everyone said you were brutal, merciless, impossible. But I took the risk because I had no other choice. She paused. And I was right to trust you. Maybe we need to extend that same chance to the Garretts. They're not like me, aren't they? Outcasts trying to survive in a system designed to crush them? Sounds familiar. Rowan pulled away, running a hand through his dark hair. If this goes wrong, if they betray us, then we deal with it. But if we do nothing, the coalition dies anyway. Clara's voice softened. You taught me that survival sometimes means taking terrible risks. Let me take this one. After a long silence, Rowan finally nodded. I'll arrange a meeting, but I'm coming with you, and we bring enough firepower to make them think twice about treachery. The Garrett stronghold was a fortress carved into a canyon, accessible only through a narrow passage that could be defended by a handful of men. Clara rode toward it 3 days later with Rowan, James, and 20 armed guards, enough to look serious, not enough to seem like an invasion. They were stopped at the canyon entrance by rough-looking sentries who searched them for weapons before allowing them through. The stronghold itself was surprisingly organized, not the chaotic bandit camp Clara had expected, but a functioning community with smithies, stables, and even what looked like a school. The Garrett leader, a woman named Catherine Garrett, received them in a hall built from salvaged timber and stone. She was maybe 40, scarred and weathered, with eyes that missed nothing. Duke Blackthorn, Catherine said, her voice carrying an edge of amusement. Never thought I'd see you in my hall without trying to kill me. The feeling is mutual. Rowan's tone was ice. This is Clara Vance. She has a proposal. Catherine's gaze shifted to Clara, assessing. The girl from the auction platform. Heard you've been causing trouble for Carrington. That true? Yes, Clara said simply, and I'm here to cause more, with your help. Why would I help you? Because Evelyn Carrington is strangling our supply routes, and she's doing the same to you. She wants control of every trade passage through the mountains. If she succeeds, you're finished. Catherine laughed. We've survived worse than Carrington. Have you? Clara pulled out maps showing Carrington's expanding territorial claims. She's systematically buying or intimidating settlements along your traditional routes. In 6 months, she'll have legal authority to arrest anyone using those passages without her permission. Your entire operation will be outlawed. The amusement faded from Catherine's face. Keep talking. We offer you legitimate trading rights through coalition settlements. Safe passage, legal documentation, the ability to operate openly instead of as outlaws. Clara leaned forward. In exchange, you allow our supply caravans through Garrett territory and provide armed escort. We break Carrington's monopoly together. And what stops you from betraying us once you get what you need? What stops you from robbing our caravans? Clara countered. Nothing but mutual need and the understanding that we're both better off cooperating than fighting. Catherine studied her for a long moment. You've got nerve. I'll give you that. Walking into Garrett territory and proposing an alliance with the people who've killed your partner's men. She's not my partner, Rowan said quietly. She's my equal, and the decision is hers. Clara felt the weight of his words, the significance of that public acknowledgement. She turned back to Catherine. Your people deserve the same thing my coalition is fighting for, the right to exist without being crushed by systems designed to exploit you. Help us break those systems. Catherine stood, pacing to a crude map on her wall. If I agree to this, half my people will think I've gone soft. The other half will think I'm insane. Then you'll fit right in with the coalition, Clara said with a slight smile. We're all a little insane. Catherine barked a laugh. I like you. Against my better judgment, but I like you. She turned back. We'll escort your caravans. We'll provide passage. But if anyone in your precious coalition tries to arrest my people for past crimes, the deal's off and we take what we want by force. Agreed, Clara said. No retrospective prosecution for anything that happened before today. And we get 20% of all goods that pass through our territory. 10%. And we provide medical supplies and education resources for your community. Catherine's eyebrows rose. Education resources? You have children here. They deserve to learn to read, to do mathematics, to have opportunities beyond just survival. Clara gestured to the settlement visible through the hall's windows. We're not just building a trade agreement, we're building a future. For the first time, Catherine looked genuinely moved. 15% and the education resources. Deal. They sealed the agreement with handshakes and written contracts, crude but binding. As Clara and Rowan prepared to leave, Catherine pulled Clara aside. That thing you said at the assembly about having the authority of everyone who survived the system, you meant that, didn't you? Every word. Then maybe you're exactly what the frontier needs. Someone who's been crushed and refused to stay down. Catherine paused. Good luck. You're going to need it. The alliance with the Garretts changed everything. Within 2 weeks, supply caravans were flowing through alternate routes. Coalition settlements received the grain, medicine, and materials they needed to survive the winter. Carrington's blockade became meaningless. But Evelyn wasn't finished. The attack came on a frozen morning in late January. Clara was in Redstone, helping Sarah Brennan organize a workers' education program, when riders arrived with devastating news. Carrington's forces attacked Twin Rivers. The messenger gasped. Burned half the settlement. David Chen is dead. Clara felt the world tilt. David, Mrs. Chen's nephew, one of the first to support the coalition, dead. How many casualties? Rowan demanded, materializing beside her. At least 30 dead, twice that injured. They targeted the grain stores and medical buildings specifically. The messenger's voice broke. It was massacre disguised as law enforcement. They claimed they were arresting coalition conspirators. She's escalating to open warfare, James said grimly. This isn't economic pressure anymore. This is elimination. Clara's grief crystallized into cold fury. Then we end this. Now, we march on Carrington Hall and what? Rowan grabbed her shoulders. Storm it with an army we don't have? Get everyone killed? We can't let her murder our people. We won't. Rowan's eyes were hard. But we do it smart. We use the law against her, just like you taught us. Clara wanted to scream, to rage, to burn Carrington Hall to the ground with Evelyn inside it. But Rowan was right. Violence would only prove Evelyn's narrative, that the coalition was dangerous and needed to be crushed. The Territorial Council, Clara said slowly. We bring formal charges. Murder. Destruction of property. Violation of settlement sovereignty. The council won't act against Carrington, Tobias said. Half of them are in her pocket. Then we make them. Clara's mind was racing now, grief transforming into strategy. We don't just file charges. We make it public, massive, impossible to ignore. She turned to the messenger. Get writers to every settlement in the coalition. I want witnesses, people who saw what happened at Twin Rivers. I want documentation. I want this undeniable. Over the next week, Clara built a case that couldn't be dismissed or buried. Testimonies from survivors, physical evidence of the attack, documentation proving Carrington's forces had acted without legal authority. She compiled it all into a presentation that was damning in its thoroughness. But she needed a venue where the Territorial Council couldn't ignore it, somewhere public, with witnesses who couldn't be intimidated or silenced. We call our own assembly, Clara declared at a coalition meeting, not in Carrington Hall or any council-controlled space, in neutral territory. And we invite everyone, council members, settlement leaders, merchants, workers. We make it so public they can't hide. That's never been done, Margaret Thorne said. Assemblies are called by the Territorial Council, not by citizens. Then we'll be the first, Clara replied. Frontier law doesn't actually forbid it, it's just never been challenged. They organized it in 3 weeks, a massive gathering in an open field outside Ashford, the same city where Clara had been sold 7 months ago. The symbolism was deliberate. 3,000 people came. Coalition members, curious settlers, merchants tired of Carrington's monopolies, even some Territorial Council members who were starting to question the status quo. They gathered in the freezing February cold to witness history. Clara stood on a raised platform, deliberately echoing the auction platform where this had all started, and presented her case. For 2 hours, she methodically dismantled Evelyn Carrington's lies. She showed evidence of the Twin Rivers massacre. She presented testimony after testimony of Carrington's illegal actions, economic extortion, and systematic abuse of power. The crowd was silent, transfixed. When Clara finished, she turned to where the Territorial Council members sat in an uncomfortable cluster at the front of the crowd. You have a choice, Clara said, her voice carrying across the field. You can continue supporting a system that murders innocent people to maintain power, or you can stand for something better. She paused. I know what it's like to feel powerless. I stood on a platform in this city and was sold like property because I had no choice, no power, no hope. But I found something stronger than power. I found purpose. I found people worth fighting for. She gestured to the crowd. Every person here has been crushed by the system you uphold. Every person here deserves better. And we're not asking for your permission anymore. We're telling you how things are going to be. That's sedition, Lord Carrington roared, struggling to his feet. You're calling for rebellion. I'm calling for justice, Clara corrected. If that's rebellion to you, then yes, we're rebelling. The crowd erupted in cheers. Evelyn pushed forward, her face twisted with rage. You self-righteous little whore. You think one speech changes anything? You think these people will follow you against real power? I don't think, Clara said quietly. I know, because I already proved it. 7 months ago, I was nothing, property, worthless. Now I'm leading a movement that's threatening to topple everything you've built. That's not power, Evelyn. That's what happens when people choose to stand together instead of being divided. The council will never, the council already has. The young councilman who'd been supporting reform stood, joining Clara on the platform. I hereby move for the immediate arrest of Lady Evelyn Carrington and Lord Marcus Carrington on charges of murder, illegal use of force, and systematic violation of settlement sovereignty. Seconded, Margaret Thorne called. This is absurd, Lord Carrington bellowed. You have no authority. Put it to a vote, Clara interrupted. Right now, in front of everyone. Let's see who really has authority. The council members looked at each other, at the massive crowd watching, at the coalition that had grown too large to ignore. One by one, hands went up in favor of the motion. Not all of them. Not even a majority at first. But then something remarkable happened. Regular citizens started raising their hands too. Settlement leaders, workers, people who'd never had a voice in territorial governance suddenly claiming one. The vote became a wave, a tide of raised hands that swept across the field until it was undeniable. The council had lost control of its own proceedings. By popular acclaim, the young councilman said, his voice shaking with the magnitude of what was happening, the motion passes. Lady Evelyn Carrington and Lord Marcus Carrington are hereby arrested pending formal trial. Evelyn's face went white. You can't do this. You're under arrest, James said, appearing with coalition guards. Come quietly or we make this difficult. As the Carringtons were led away in chains, Clara stood on the platform watching the crowd celebrate. They'd done it. Actually done it. Broken the system that had seemed unbreakable. Rowan climbed onto the platform beside her, his gray eyes reflecting something Clara had never seen before. Wonder. You started a revolution, he said quietly. We started a revolution, Clara corrected. All of us. No. Rowan shook his head. I bought you off a platform thinking I could save you from the world. Instead, you saved the world from itself. Clara felt tears on her cheeks, grief for David Chen and everyone who died fighting, relief that it was finally over, an overwhelming emotion at the magnitude of what they'd achieved. What happens now? She asked. Now we rebuild. Actually rebuild, not just patch things together. Rowan turned to face her fully. The council's going to need new leadership. People who understand reform, who've lived through what needs to change. Clara understood what he was asking. I'm not a politician. You're better than that. You're someone who survived hell and used that experience to build something better. He paused. The coalition needs a voice in territorial governance. You're that voice. I can't do this alone. You won't have to. Rowan took her hand, the first time he'd voluntarily touched her beyond necessity. I'll be right beside you. As your partner, your equal, whatever you need. Clara looked at their joined hands, at the crowd still celebrating, at the future spreading out before them like uncharted territory. 7 months ago, she'd been property, sold for $3,000 to a warlord who'd seemed as dangerous as everything else in her collapsing world. Now she was standing on a platform again, but this time by choice. This time as a leader. This time as someone who'd proven that strength wasn't about power or violence or crushing others. It was about refusing to stay broken, about turning pain into purpose, about standing up and fighting even when the world said you were worthless. What about Marcus? Clara asked suddenly, remembering her stepfather with the worthless mining claims. Rowan's smile was sharp. Last I heard, he'd gone west to work those mines. Should be realizing about now that he was swindled. Too late to do anything about it, though. Clara should have felt guilty. She didn't. Marcus had made his choices. She'd made hers. And hers had led to this. To victory, to justice, to something bigger than revenge. Over the next months, everything transformed. The Territorial Council restructured under new leadership, with Clara serving as the head of the newly formed Labor and Settlement Rights Committee. Evelyn Carrington stood trial and was sentenced to 20 years in a territorial prison. Her father received 10 for his complicity. The indenture system was abolished entirely, replaced with regulated employment contracts with mandatory minimums for wages and worker protections. Settlement autonomy was legally recognized. The Garrett Gang, now the Garrett Trading Company, became legitimate merchants with legal rights. Blackthorn Estate became the headquarters of the coalition, which evolved into the Frontier Workers Alliance. Clara and Rowan ran it together, true partners in every sense. Not romantically, neither of them had time or inclination for that complication, but with a bond forged in fire that was stronger than romance anyway. Mrs. Chen became the first director of education, establishing schools in settlements across the territories. Sarah Brennan took over settlement governance in Redstone and expanded it into a thriving community. James headed security for the Alliance. Even Tobias, who doubted Clara from the start, became her most trusted advisor on economic policy. The change wasn't perfect. Resistance remained. Some settlements refused to join the alliance. Some merchants tried to maintain the old exploitative practices. But the tide had turned irreversibly. 10 months after standing on an auction platform, Clara Vance stood in the territorial council chambers, now open to public attendance, and gave her first official address as head of the Labor Rights Committee. We gather here today not as property and owners, not as strong and weak, but as equals, she began, her voice carrying to every corner of the packed room. We gather to build something the frontier has never seen, a system based not on exploitation, but on cooperation, not on crushing the vulnerable, but on protecting them. She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the crowd, former victims of indenture, settlement leaders who'd taken the risk to support reform, even a few former council members who'd switched sides when they saw the tide turning. I was told I was worth $3,000, Clara continued. That was my value, determined by men who saw me as property. But here's what I learned. Our worth isn't determined by what others are willing to pay for us. It's determined by what we're willing to fight for. And I fought. We all fought. For the radical idea that every person deserves dignity, every worker deserves fair compensation, every child deserves opportunity, every life has value that can't be bought or sold. The room was silent, hanging on every word. This is just the beginning, Clara said. We've broken one system. Now we build a better one. It won't be easy, it won't be fast, but it will be worth it. Because when we look back years from now, we'll know we chose to stand for something bigger than ourselves. We chose to make the frontier a place where strength is measured not by how many you can crush, but by how many you can lift up. The applause was deafening. As Clara stepped down from the podium, Rowan met her at the bottom of the stairs. Good speech. Thanks. Wrote it myself this time, she smiled. Think we can actually do this? Build something that lasts? I think if anyone can, it's you. Rowan offered his arm. Ready to change the world some more? Clara took it, feeling the weight of responsibility and the lightness of purpose in equal measure. Always. They walked out of the council chambers together into the spring sunshine. Ashford stretched around them, the same city where Clara had been sold, now the capital of a revolution she'd sparked. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew. Progress coming to the frontier, bringing new opportunities and new challenges. The world was changing, and Clara had proven she could change with it. More than that, she could lead the change. She thought of everyone who'd made this possible, the workers who'd risked everything, the settlements that had stood together, David Chen and everyone who'd died fighting, Sarah Brennan's sister, who died 7 years ago believing she was worthless. This was for all of them. This victory, this future, this proof that the system could be beaten. Clara Vance had been sold on a platform for $3,000. Now she was priceless. Not because of Rowan's protection, or the coalition's success, or even her position on the territorial council, but because she'd learned the most important truth of all, that strength isn't given. It isn't inherited. It isn't bought. It's forged, in fire and pain, and choosing to stand up one more time after being knocked down. She'd been forged in the auction house, tempered in the fight against Carrington, and emerged as something new. Not a victim, not even just a survivor. A force, a leader. A woman who'd been told she was property and responded by proving that no one could be owned who refused to accept it. The frontier would never be the same, and neither would Clara Vance. She'd survived, she'd fought, she'd won. And in the harshest corners of the world, where the strong had always crushed the weak, Clara had built something different, something better, something that would outlast all of them. She'd built hope. And hope, it turned out, was the most unstoppable force of all.